Hey, welcome back. This is my channel where I talk about my journey from being a tech worker and then becoming a psychotherapist. And today I wanted to specifically talk about my process when it came to the Practicum application. So I'll be covering like what is Practicum, what did my process look like, what are some of the interview questions that I received, and like what would I do differently, and I'll also show you like the tracker that I use to track all the places that I applied. So let's get to it. So what is Practicum? So Practicum is basically an internship that you have while in school, and it's a part of your degree. So it's basically kind of like a class, but it's an internship. In the internship, you see clients, you see a supervisor, so it's pretty much like what you would do post-graduating, but this is like probably your first time you're gonna see clients if you haven't before. Most of the time it's unpaid, but I have heard of places that are paid, and technically you're like paying because it's a part of class, so you have tuition, but like if we don't go into technicalities, it's like unpaid. So the requirements for Practicum is, depending on the program, it's roughly around 280 hours that you need to have with a client. And that's roughly like 20 hours per week. So like a part-time job for 2 to 3 semesters, roughly. And it can't be in a private practice. So it's a little tricky because some clinics use a private practice model, but are nonprofits. And then there are private, like actual private practice clinics. And so just remember that for Practicum, it can't be a private practice. Another thing that's like kind of related to Practicum is a lot of programs require you to have personal therapy, like 50 hours. So like once a week, you're seeing a personal therapist. And typically that's also not part of your tuition. So you need to pay that out of pocket and just show proof that you've had therapy throughout your time at Practicum. And I think the idea is that they want you to be able to have support in different ways. And so you're going to see your supervisor in your clinic. You may see a different supervisor from your school. And also you would have personal therapy to talk about your first experience seeing clients. So where am I in my process? So I am in a 3-year program. I just finished my 2nd year and I'm going to start my Practicum site in a couple months. So I haven't seen clients yet. So I've just kind of like wrapped up my Practicum application, interviewing and figuring out where I'm gonna go. So I thought it would be a perfect time for me to create this video. My Practicum process took around 3 months. I started in January and I knew where I was gonna go by like mid-March, end of March. So I tracked where I wanted to go in a Google Sheet and I will walk through that right now. Hey, so this is where I tracked all of the places that I applied for Practicum. I kind of blocked out the names of the places that I applied, but some of the things that I kept track were like the population, the city, and the types of models that they use. Obviously, I also kept track of like the deadlines and things like that. I would say the deadlines were sometimes hard to find, and they were online or on the web, so I would have to email them, and it took a little bit of time to figure that out. I wanted to make sure I knew which places needed a cover letter and which ones needed a reference, because you definitely want to send those out to your professors or people who's writing that letter at least 2 weeks in advance. I would even say if you have a month, that's even better. And then I had a link to like where the application was. So that's pretty simple, I would say. I think the other thing I did with this was I ranked them in terms of like how interested I was, and I had these backups as well. I was told by my school that I should apply to at least 5 or 6. So I applied to 6, and just in case I had these backups. And this sheet really helped me, I think, rank them and just like know for my own sake, like which, where I was in my process, and like, feel a little bit better that I was doing the steps I needed to apply to these places. As you can see, I submitted applications for 6 different sites and I got interviews with 5. And I start in a couple months. So some of the questions that I got in my interview, it really depended on the site and the type of therapy that they offered. But just an example, here are some of the questions. Who inspires your work with understanding race and racism? What part of you do you notice right now? And what does community mean to you? Like I said, the questions that I got asked were really dependent on the place that I was applying. If I were to do this again, I would prep on, I think there were a lot of questions on like what inspired me, what kind of people, who in my life, why do I want to be a therapist? Somatic awareness was something that I definitely touched on, but that's like kind of the focus that I want to go. So I definitely talked about that. That's all I can think of right now. Questions that I would ask my interviewer is about my supervisor. So your supervisor is super important. Some people say it's like the most important part of practicum, because these are the people that are going to talk to you about any of the questions that you have and kind of like walk through how your sessions are going, and you're going to be like mentored by them basically. So it's really important that you speak to your supervisor, in my opinion, and like kind of get a feel of like how they are and if you think you might fit with them. I definitely like went to some open houses and I met the supervisor and I was like, no, I this is not gonna work. So yeah, definitely talk to your supervisor. I also think it's really important to know like who your population is. Sometimes I saw clinics that were focused on like the type of therapy they did, and then they didn't talk about like what kind of person usually walked in. And I saw clinics that focused on like a specific population they worked with, and they didn't talk as much about like the type of therapy that they did with the clients. And so I think it's really important to learn about both of them pretty in depth and see how interested you are. So looking back, how would I prepare for the application process? One is just like having enough time to prepare before the cycle starts. So for me, I had a lot of paperwork with the school that I needed to get lined up before I could apply to sites. I don't know if it's just my school, but I had to get like advisor approval, like practicum readiness approval, like all these things I needed to be approved from my school before I could apply. And so that took a lot more time than I had expected. So I just recommend like being able to start on that if you can before you're starting to see deadlines for practicum sites appear. Another thing is I would recommend seeing in-person open houses versus remote. Sometimes I had the option of going to an open house in person, and that was really helpful. And I regretted not going to the in-person one sometimes because you can't see the interactions between different people. You can't really get a feel of the space as much for me. So I recommend, going to them in person if you can. And lastly, like it took me some time to get used to interviewing as a therapist and like the types of questions that they ask. So the first couple ones just felt a little awkward and, I was tripping up with my words, and I eventually got more used to it. And I think that's an experience that I heard from a lot of my classmates. And it's just normal that it takes some time and practice to get used to your interviewing skills as a therapist. You probably haven't done it before. So, like give yourself some grace if your first couple are just feeling a little clunky or weird. Like that's normal and it's gonna happen. It's fine. Best of luck with your application process. I really hope that you end up in the place that you want, and I hope this was helpful for you.
I'm falling to pieces in my room.